Welcome back everyone, my name is Daan and I am a medical doctor from the Netherlands and a certified psychedelic therapist. Today we're going to talk about psilocybin, how it works and why it's such a fantastic tool for certain mental health challenges. And we will do quite a deep dive, so by the end of this video you won't just know that it works, because many people by now have heard that it works, right? But you will have an up-to-date understanding of why and how it works, which is of course very important if you are considering to use this wonderful tool. Now to do that, let's start with talking about neuroplasticity, because this really is a key concept to understand if you want to know how psilocybin works. For a very long time, even when I was still in medical school, the very common belief was that the adult brain doesn't change very much. But what we know now is really quite different, because the brain is constantly changing, which means that new connections are being formed all the time, and the more you use certain connections or pathways, the stronger that they get. And the ones that you do not use, they get weaker over time. So even though many people do not change their behaviors very much as adults, that is true, right? We all know examples of adult people that should be changing but aren't. But this probably has a lot more to do with their habits than with a fundamental problem of their brain to change. So this is really a very important distinction. The brain can change, but you have to put in the effort to change it. Now, an analogy that I often use is to think of your brain as a forest. And a forest is of course very much alive and is always growing and changing. And the thoughts and behaviors that you repeat are like paths through that forest. The more you walk on a certain path, the bigger and more relevant it becomes. And unfortunately, the brain does not discriminate between the paths that serve you or the ones that are self-sabotaging. It just reinforces the ones that you use. And that includes the dysfunctional ones. And what starts out as a tiny little path in the forest can over time turn into this. A 6-lane highway where you quite literally get stuck in traffic in your own mind. So why do we take the highway then, even though we know it does not serve us? Well, that's because the brain is built for efficiency, not for wisdom. So it will always try to take the path of the least resistance. And doing things differently, making a new path, well, that takes effort in the beginning, which everyone intuitively knows, because that's why change is so hard, of course. But if you walk it enough times, over time, what started as a new, very narrow trail can eventually become the brain's new highway. So now you understand the basic principles of neuroplasticity. And here's where the psilocybin comes in, because as you will see, it facilitates the changing process in several really beautiful ways. Psilocybin is a compound that's found in mushrooms that grow all over planet Earth, and it has been used in many cultures for probably thousands of years. So even though we are rediscovering it, it has been around for a very long time. And when you take it, your body converts it into psilocin, which is the bioactive form of the molecule. Psilocin then crosses the blood-brain barrier and starts to affect certain receptors in the brain. And if we look at psilocin next to serotonin, you can see that these are very similar molecules. And because of this similarity, psilocin loves to bind to serotonin receptors. And the receptor that specifically drives the psychedelic experience is called the 5-HT2A receptor. How do we know that? Well, when we give people a drug that blocks this receptor, you also block the psychedelic effect. Alright, so now the psilocybin is in the brain. One of the first things that starts to happen is that these areas of the brain, which are called the default mode network, get affected. And the default mode network is kind of like your brain's news department, constantly telling you the story of you and your life. And for many people, much like the regular news actually, it tends to focus on everything that is going wrong. So if you ever woke up at 3 a.m. worrying about everything you need to fix and all your problems and issues, that's the default mode network talking to you. And what many mental health conditions share, like depression, anxiety, addictions, is that this default mode network tends to become overactive, thereby keeping people stuck in these repetitive and unhelpful thought loops. And what psilocybin very beautifully does is temporarily disrupt the activity in this part of the brain, allowing you to get some distance from your usual way of perceiving yourself and the world. Now, at the same time that the default mode network quiets down and your usual mental chatter softens, something really interesting starts to happen, which is that brain regions that normally don't communicate suddenly will start talking to each other. And to illustrate this, let's look at this image. On the left, we see the brain in its normal state. Around the edge of the circle are the different brain regions, and the lines between them show how strongly they are connected. So the more lines that you see, the more communication there is between the different brain regions. Now let's compare that with the people that receive psilocybin. That's a very big difference in interconnectivity, right? It's like someone suddenly turned the lights on. So how does this increased interconnectivity then show up during the experience? Well, that often presents itself as insights, new ways of looking at old problems, and you realizing things that sit just outside of your usual frame of reference. And one of the most important connections that many people make is that they connect what they know up here in the mind with what they feel in their heart. Because as the saying goes, the longest journey that you will ever take is the journey from the mind to the heart. And what of course is meant by this is that many of us already know what it is that is bothering us and what needs to change. But this knowledge is somehow stuck up here in the mind and is not fully felt or embodied. And when psilocybin allows you to really make that connection and really feel it, that's when change becomes almost effortless. And I've seen this many times now. People with lifelong habits, things they struggle with for often decades, suddenly feel in their whole body during a psilocybin experience that is just time to let it go and stop. And once that happens, they just quit and very often never look back. So a simple way to put this is that psilocybin helps you to feel it and then heal it, which is almost the opposite of what regular psychiatric medication does, right? Because that could be said to help you suppress it and not address it. And finally, as if all of this wasn't enough, as a last gift, psilocybin temporarily puts the brain into a state of increased neuroplasticity, which means that after the experience, you can much more easily create new neural pathways instead of automatically falling back into the old and unhelpful ones. Think of it as fresh snow on the mountains. The old paths are still underneath there somewhere, but it's now much easier to carve out a new path for yourself. And very much like fresh snow on the mountains, this increased neuroplasticity often comes with a sense of freshness and aliveness, which is something so many people feel after a psilocybin journey. So let's summarize all of this and bring it together. Your brain is not broken, it's just stuck in certain patterns. And the patterns that you use are the ones that become the strongest, whether they are helpful or not. Psilocybin works by temporarily loosening those patterns. It quiets the default mode network, the part of your brain that keeps on telling the same old story. And at the same time, it massively increases interconnectivity across the brain. This then allows you to step outside of your usual way of thinking, feel into your emotions more directly, and see your problems from a completely different perspective. And to top it all off, psilocybin temporarily increases neuroplasticity, giving you a real window of opportunity after the experience to create new and healthier patterns instead of falling back into the old ones. So when you look at this, it always really amazes me. Isn't it beautiful how wonderful these things work together? You have something here that, when guided properly, is safe. That gives you an experience to look at your situation from a different perspective, and then even provides exactly the right conditions in the brain to implement changes into your life. It really is a power tool for self-analysis and for implementing change. And that's why it's so helpful for many different mental health conditions across the board. And it's all packaged together in a cute little mushroom. It's almost as if nature knows what the f*** it is doing. Lastly, any tool is only as good as the person that's using it. And with psilocybin, it's no difference. How much you get out of it really depends on your preparation, your intention, your support, and what you do after the experience. It's not just the psilocybin that does the work, but it's really how you use it. So it makes a lot of sense to work with somebody that can guide you through that whole process. Alright, thanks for watching. Please share in the comments what psilocybin has done for you. And if you want to help get this channel off the ground, please subscribe. Peace and see you next time.